Hi, Primal Punch here, bringing Halloween. I'm going to go ahead and every night now until Halloween I'm going to read a story or two from this Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Because what else is Halloween about, you know? It's about getting a little scared and getting a little candy, you know? Having fun. Because life's too short to not have a little fun. So, let's have some fun. Trying to adjust the light here to a little Halloweeny. Don't even know if I'm showing up. If I'm not, that's okay too. We'll start it off with a nice little song here. There was an old woman, all skin and bone, who lived near the graveyard all alone. Oh. She thought she'd go to church one day to hear the parson preach and pray. Oh. And when she came to the church house stile, she thought she'd stop and rest a while. Oh. When she came up to the door, she thought she'd stop and rest some more. Oh. But when she turned and looked around, she saw a corpse upon the ground. Oh. From its nose down to its chin, the worms crawled out and the worms crawled in. Oh. The woman to the preacher said, "Shall I look like that when I am dead?" Oh. The preacher to the woman said, "You'll look like that when you are dead." Ah! Alright. So now we'll go to a story, okay? Let's see here. We'll try this one. The Haunted House. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they always would get scared away by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house. Went on in, built himself a good fire, and lit a lamp. He sat there reading the Bible. Then just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar. Walking back and forth. Whew. Then it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally, everything got quiet. Well, the old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer and closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy like, and there wasn't a sound. Now the preacher, he was trembling and shaking a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending and tending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, and he saw the doorknob start to turn and the door open. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you, and what do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed, like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher, he waited and waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and he shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and he sat down and waited. Well, it wasn't long before that haunt started up again, and he could hear it slowly, slowly, step, 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 closer and closer, step, step. And it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and he held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face, so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light way back in her sockets, and she had no nose upon her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover had killed her for money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury them properly, then she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger of her left hand and to lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, "If you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where the money is hidden, and you can give it to the church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk down toward the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and he buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at that bone trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder and they took him on to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to that house one midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock right by the fireplace. He did, and he found a big sack of money. And where the haunt had held onto his coat, the print of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth, and it never did come out. This is Primal Punch wishing y'all have a good time, be respectful to each other, and remember, ooh, punch hard.